We got our cameras all running, and we want to welcome you most heartily. It's great to look around and see this size audience for this important program. For those of you who are looking at me and say, he looks vaguely familiar, I was the guy for 20 years at WTIU who asked you for money. My name is Keith Klein, and I've been knocking around in Bloomington since I was a student. I left for 10 years to work at NBC News in Chicago and came back to Bloomington and have been here ever since. So I love this place. There's a lot to do, and there are a lot of good people in this community that are working to make it happen. We want to make sure that you understand that tonight's program is designed to give candidates information about living with developmental disability or a mental illness or supporting someone who does do that. It's also to help the audience know more about how the candidates and to learn how they would respond to aging, disability issues, should they be elected or re-elected to office. Our sponsoring organizations, this is the people that make all of this kind of thing possible, and that is the information is in your handouts, but we ask that the people responsible for tonight's program together stand as I call the name of your organization. So one of the sponsoring organizations is Down Syndrome Family Connection. If you're here from that organization, please stand. All right. Next is that's good. Next is Mental Health America. Got people over here and over there. We have the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI. Life Design. Way over there, okay. And Stone Belt. Stone Belt wins the audience participation. Now, will all the board members of the sponsoring organizations stand to be recognized? If you're a board member of any of those organizations, please stand and be recognized. Thank you very much for that. And we also want to thank Community Access Television for recording this event so that it can be made available on their channel for other interested people who may not be able to watch it now or may sometime in the future. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but you can call CATS and you can request a program that they have in their library be played on their air, and they will do that, so you might want to keep that in mind. This event is also being live streamed on Facebook by Stone Belt, Life Designs, and we usually make the announcement, please turn off your cell phones. I forgot how to do this. I am technology challenged. And according to what it's telling me, it's Dr. Grossman telling me that I have an eye appointment. So thank you, Dr. Grossman. All right, so this event is being live streamed on Facebook by Stone Belt, Life Designs, and Down Syndrome Family Connection, and it'll be available on Facebook later as well. Now, we'd like to introduce our advocates panel. We have several things that are going to be happening for you tonight, and our advocates panel is, you've seen her column in the HT. She's somewhat of a celebrity in this area. I'm not sure who's the greater celebrity, you or your dog, but first question I had is the dog here tonight? But I want to introduce to you Adria Nassim, and she's a blogger for the Herald Times, contributing a weekly column that offers unique perspective on living as a young adult with a disability. She graduated in Owensboro, Kentucky in 2010 with a BA in English and Spanish. She came to Bloomington to participate in the college internship program and is now supported by Life Designs. Once again, this is Adria Nassim. Then we have Marcia McCarty. Okay. Marcia McCarty is our next advocate, and she is a psychologist, PhD, HSPP in private practice, provided mental health services to the Bloomington for the past 40 years. She began her work here working in the Community Mental Health Center, later in private practice and as a director of Catholic Charities. Much of her work is focused on children and families, persons with disabilities, and families living in poverty. Marcia McCarty. And finally, Kate McQueen, and she is a parent who will speak from the perspective of having a young child who has been through first steps. So that is your panel. Please welcome Kate. The way the first part of the program is going to work is each of the panelists will have 3 to 5 minutes to impart their knowledge. We've allowed 30 minutes for this, and you can direct the questions to them to facilitate the discussion. If you have a question, want to ask a question, please indicate so by holding up your hand, and somebody will come around and give you a card that you can ask a question. But is there a pre-selected order, or just go down the line? Okay. So we will start with Adria, and she will speak first. And if we get close to the time, Adria, I'll let you know. But keep going until we say stop.
Okay.
I'm going to use the microphone there.
What would you like to know, Rudy?
What do you want to talk about how you get along, how you do things, those kinds of things?
Okay. As he said, my name is Adrian Asim, and some of you may be familiar with my column in the paper. I think it's really helped me to get more comfortable in the community and to be known by people. How I get along with things, my service dog, who's not here tonight because she went all over the world today running errands with me. The dog, her name is Lucy. She's trained for autism spectrum disorder and cerebral palsy for balance assistance. She's really helped to increase my independence in the community. I think if I did not have a dog, a service dog, I am also supported by a direct support professional who's also here. But I think if I did not have a dog, my support from a direct support professional, my hours would be a lot higher. It would be, I'm just going to say her name. I hope that's okay. Her name is Annie. Taking me to the doctor, taking me to church, taking me to a psychotherapy appointment, and instead it's me and Lou, usually getting on a bus, going to therapy, going to Target, going to the doctor or whatever it may be, and doing things independently. And just so you know, I came to Bloomington in 2008 for a private transitional living skills program that he mentioned. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Keith, okay. Keith had mentioned it before. I came in 2008 for the college internship program. And when I first came to Bloomington, you're talking about a young person who couldn't cross the street independently because of severe visual spatial acuity problems, because of a learning disability. And I couldn't walk to the bank by myself. And now, Lucy, one of the tasks that she's trained in is to find the way home on command by saying a verbal cue. And if she was here, which she's not, I'll go ahead and say it. But when she's around, unless you really mean it, you don't say it because she gets very, very excited and she knows that's her job and we're going to work. So you say, Lucy, go home. And she starts sniffing and she kind of leads out in front of me and finds the way home. And she can't be at like Orlando, Florida in Walt Disney World, but anywhere pretty much within the vicinity of Bloomington, she can track the way home. And it's been really freeing for me to be able to live 2.5 hours away from my parents and be able to live pretty much independently with some supports, of course, and I'm grateful for those. But yeah, I think the dog has done a lot. I think also, which we're going to talk about some here today, as I understand it, the direct support professional relationship. I think Annie and the other direct support professionals that I've had in the past are another key factor in helping me achieve independence. You might look at a young person like me and wonder, you know, why does a young person like you need a direct support professional? And it's really for kind of executive functioning skills and making sure, you know, I'm organized, my backpack is packed for the day, my lunch is packed, my clothes are set out for work, laundry's done. So independent living skills, as well as for the autism spectrum disorder, because I am diagnosed as having an autism spectrum disorder, there is some social skills that we work on and some social outings in the community and that sort of thing. But I think Annie's a big part of it. Also, I have a relationship with a sorority on IU's campus called Alpha Xi Delta, which raises money for Autism Speaks, which is a national autism advocacy organization. And it's been a really great part of my experience here in Bloomington, because for 156 girls, I get to teach them what it's been like to have autism and really live with it day to day. And then for me, I also get to have like 150 something big sisters, and there's constantly people coming into the house, like new members every fall. So it's like a growing family that accept me and get to know me for who I am. So I'm really excited, and it's been very fulfilling. Let's see. I'm very thankful for also the great public transportation that there is in Bloomington, because I kind of already said, my dog Lucy and I, we use that pretty much all throughout the week. But my family wanted to find a city where I could walk and I could get along easy. And Bloomington has been, I think, the perfect city for me to live independently, because it is pedestrian friendly and it also has a good amount of reliable, for the most part, public transportation. And I think another point I should add to that is that it's very disability friendly. You go to businesses and you see decals on businesses' doors that say people with disabilities welcome. And I think, you know, in my hometown in Floyd County, we didn't have that. And so I think the culture here lends itself to one of acceptance of differences, which also helps as well. So, yeah. Any other, I mean, I don't know if we take questions now.
We'll come back to questions after all three of you have spoken.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time.
Our next speaker is Marsha McCarty.
Hi, everyone. As Keith said earlier, I came to Bloomington about 40 years ago to work in the mental health field. Before that, I taught special education over in Vigo County, and I worked as a school psychologist in the schools. And so I've had a career of those two things. They used to be pretty separate. Either you worked in the mental health world or you worked with intellectual and other kinds of disabilities. That, thanks to Stone Belt and other agencies, Life Design, that is not so much true anymore. But when I first came here, I wanted to be able to work with, do both things, and I was lucky to meet, back then, some people from Stone Belt, and so that's been a part of my life from my career from the beginning. I'm on the board of Mental Health America, and I want to be sure, and so at our last meeting, we spent some time thinking about it, and as we do all along, it's like what's working well in mental health and what isn't working so well. And I've got to see the fluctuations in that over time. And right now, I'm just going to read through the list quickly, what we feel like we're experiencing in this community, and I don't think it's that different from around the rest of the states. Not enough service providers, especially for low-income families. huge lack of psychiatric services for both children and adults, again, especially for low-income folks. Lack of psychological evaluation services, especially for low-income families. Lack of crisis intervention services. Too long of waiting periods for follow-up services after being released from crisis care. Not enough service providers, especially for young children, from birth to age 7 or 8. And what we know is early intervention works the best. And so it's an area that we really need more people being trained in. Access difficult for low-income families due to barriers including transportation, child care, type of insurance or lack of insurance, lack of structure or support, and not enough bilingual services. So those are some of the things that we're seeing. One of the things that's been wonderful to experience over all the years I've been working in mental health is the knowledge has just skyrocketed. I mean, what we know now about the brain, what we know about what impacts mental health, what we know about trauma, all those things, and many, many more. We know a lot, and we know what works, and a lot of wonderful, well-researched means of addressing those problems are in place. So that, from where it was when I started to now, is just like that. On the other hand, when I before I finished my graduate degree, I started working at the Mental Health Center in Terre Haute, Hamilton Center. And then everything was they were really working hard on access. And during those first few years of the community mental health movement, just a lot of money was pouring into access, into prevention, all those things, and that has gone in the other direction. So it's been, in a way, it's kind of frustrating. I mean, I've loved what I've done. I've loved to be able to work with all the students I work with. I supervise mostly psychology students, but from other areas of mental health as well. But watching the access go down as the knowledge goes up is pretty frustrating. One of the big things that counteracted that was when Medicaid expanded. For years, I struggled working with kids who didn't have insurance, and maybe their parents didn't have insurance, because all along I've worked with a lot of low-income families. Then kids got on Medicaid, and that made a big difference, except that if their parents needed mental health care, they couldn't get it. They couldn't get on Medicaid. So it's very difficult, nearly impossible, to help a child if you can't help the parent. And that was a frustration for quite a while. And then came the Medicaid expansion, or in HIP. And that has made a huge difference in working with young children and working with children of all ages, because their parents, many of those parents can get on the Healthy Indiana plan. So that's really important. One of the areas that I've worked with a lot more recently is the connection between mental health and poverty and trauma. And we have an organization some of you probably know about in our county called, it's called Thriving Connections now. It used to be called Circles. And Linda Patton's the director. And she realized after working in that program for a while that many of the people in poverty had very serious trauma backgrounds and therefore serious mental health problems. And that without working on those issues, for them to try to work themselves out of poverty, it just didn't work. And we know so much about that. That's an area where you may have heard of adverse childhood experiences. We know so much of what happens in families living in poverty, living in conditions where there is trauma, what the impact of that is, and how not just mental health, but physical health, earlier death, all addictions, all those things. So to promote mental health, you really have to promote healthy communities. It matters what the environment is. It matters what the physical environment is. It matters what the social environment is. It matters what the educational system is. And you can't separate those things and work in one area and make a difference. People have to have the basics. They have to have health care. They have to have the things that allow them to live a structured, meaningful, thriving life if they're going to have mental health. That's really clear at this point. We have a group in this town that for the last 2 years has had a summit on the status of children in this community, and that's supported by an organization called Becoming a Thriving, Compassionate Community. And that's how things are going to change. And in the mental health field, it's a systemic issue, and you have to work with the system. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Kate McQueen.
Hi, so my name is Kate McQueen. I'm actually an educator here in Bloomington. I found out about 20 minutes ago that I was going to be speaking on this panel because the other parent that was coming, well, they had to deal with their child having a medical issue. Don't know the details, but that is also a pretty significant reality to being a parent of a child with disabilities. Closer? Is that better? Can everyone hear me in back? All right. So my son is named Keenan, and he was actually born and had multiple strokes within 2 days of his birthday. As a result, he does have multiple complex disabilities. He has very mild cerebral palsy. He is on the autism spectrum. And he has a really severe form of epilepsy called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is a progressive form of epilepsy. He has needed abundant care from the beginning. He has had a pre-existing condition since 2 days old. He has reached any cap that you could ever think about for medical expenses by the time he was 6 weeks old. When we came home from Riley, we were lucky enough to really be plugged into this amazing system called First Steps that was a lifesaver for me. And yes, I get emotional. We started at 9 weeks old. We started having physical therapy. We started having occupational therapy. Both came twice a week. We had speech therapy that started a few months after that. Almost the most important for me in retrospect was we had a really amazing social worker who helped me navigate this amazing paperwork world that I was overwhelmed with. I'm an educated woman. I have a master's degree. I cannot tell you what this is a full-time job. Understanding what you have to do and learning it, and then it will change because it is constantly shifting, and being able to keep up with that. It is something that I needed help with, and I can tell you that someone who is dealing with multiple issues, like maybe they're dealing with their own mental health issues, their own cognitive issues, their own just not understanding how the system works, they need support with this. Otherwise, their child will not have access to what they need in order to sometimes survive. My son would stop breathing up to 19 times an hour in a car seat. So the fact that these people came to my home was kind of a big deal for me, you know? Like, because trust me, you didn't want me on the road because I pretty much drove like this and I had a little intervention with my family because it wasn't safe, you know? The other aspect of First Steps that was a big deal for my family is that my son, when he would get, any time that he would get sick, it was a life-threatening situation. especially in his first couple of years. The fact that we didn't have to go be exposed to every germ that is brought into a pediatric center is a really important factor, because a small cold could kill my child. It still is true. He's a lot more medically stable than he was back then, but I just wouldn't have done it. You know, my son can walk now. He had an amazing physical therapist. She changed his life. She was very difficult, and she pushed us and she pushed him, and she is helping him to have a better quality of life than we hoped at one point. She no longer works for First Steps. And there's multiple reasons, but of our 5 therapists or social workers, only 1 works for First Steps at this point. My son is 8 years old. It's been 5 years. The shift that happened for us that was frankly rather traumatic is that there was a lot of changes, and again, I didn't have time to look this up because I had about 10 minutes notice, but service providers suddenly had to start going through. They were required, they could no longer turn in and get reimbursed for their services. They had to go through a separate organization, an agency. When that happened, the amount of money that the PTs, the OTs, the speech pathologists, the developmental therapists were getting changed. So you're going to lose quality people when you take away their money. You're going to lose quality people when you stop reimbursing them. We lived downtown, right? We were very easily accessible. Now we live 25 minutes in the country. That's like you're talking about a round trip hour. So you have to be able to reimburse people for that type of time. Otherwise, my child just wouldn't get services. If you've ever met him, and I think there's a few people in here who have met him, he's rather lovely. Oh, hi, there in the back, yes. He's lovely. He has a great quality of life. He's a happy, happy human being who brings happiness to other people. He's never going to live on his own, and that's okay. His epilepsy is a barrier. Maybe 5 years from now, they'll come up with something that can cure him or not. He's great, right? And a large portion of why he's great and why we're better parents and why we've been able to get him to where he is and help him get himself to where he is because of First Steps. And I had to watch First Steps start to be dismantled a little bit. And I don't actually know the current state of it right now. And because I was invited here, I'm a little bit afraid that maybe it's being attacked again. So if it's not, then great. But it is something that needs to happen. I know that when we started, that the only state that had a better early intervention program was Hawaii. And I'm just guessing that in the last 5 years, Indiana has not stayed at that spot. And I had to, in the midst of living through my son's multiple tragedies that happened in his first 3 years of life, I had to watch this social program begin to be dismantled. And I know if my son was born tomorrow, he would not have what he had. So I'm also an educator, right? And I strongly, strongly believe in inclusion education. And I know that there are children who will be born tomorrow who will not receive First Step services because maybe they live in the country and maybe there's not a service provider who's even willing to service that area, or a parent doesn't understand how to get the services, or a pediatrician doesn't talk to them about it and let them know that this service is available. I don't know all the reasons why First Steps is not getting as many kids covered, but we need to fix it. We need to figure it out. It will impact, like you were talking about how it begins to impact everything. It will impact our education. It will impact our schools. It will impact everyone in the room. You might not always understand why, but it will. So that's my off the cuff So if you have any questions,
We're going to do the questions in just a minute. We have one additional speaker, and there have been some changes. Leslie, help me.
So Barbara Salisbury was to be a panelist tonight, but unfortunately she was not able to be with us. So she asked someone to speak in her behalf, so Susan Russ is here to do that.
Okay, Susan, I'll get out of your way. Microphone, excuse me. Watch the cord there so you don't. It's all tangled up.
Hi, I am an employee of Stone Belt for, just a few years, about 24 years now. I've happily and honorably I've been able to support people with disabilities in my career. But tonight I'm here representing the Monroe County Coalition for Access and Mobility, and specifically Barbara Salisbury, who had an accident and couldn't be here. She is our very passionate leader of that group, and as we know, transportation is a really large issue. So I'm just going to read some of the points that she fed to me. So these are mostly her words, and they're just coming out of my mouth. Access to and participation in community living cannot happen without transportation. I think we heard a little bit about that already from the panel. Transportation is definitely the glue that allows for the greater independence and reduces isolation and dependence on state-funded services. People with disabilities and the aging community need to be able to move about in their city and county to access affordable housing options, educational options, medical services, and to gain and maintain employment. Supporting expanded transportation that is accessible, affordable, reliable, and timely, and Barbara wanted me to use the term as AART, ART, and she called it art-filled transportation, will only enhance independence, lessen continued reliance on state-funded services. Jurisdictional barriers need to be addressed to allow expanded travel for transit services to people outside of the city and outside of the county lines. Partnerships between public transit and private transportation services can allow for this type of mobility. Transit providers and localities need to think creatively about how to partner with area shared ride services, which shared ride is becoming larger and larger, and other transportation providers to expand the availability and area of travel for people with disabilities who are paratransit customers. Also to allow for same-day scheduling and service. There should be funding set aside to intensify these types of partnerships, program planning, and development. And the final point, localities should be allowed to bring their constituents the choice to increase revenues to support expanded transit services. Voters in each locality should make the choice.
We're going to go on the questions I'm going to ask. Whoever wants to answer the question, if a couple of you want to answer the question, feel free. I'll put the mic over here so we can do that. We have a number of elected officials and candidates for those jobs here, and I'm going to start with a question that is kind of obvious for them, and that is to any of you that want to elaborate further on what is at stake for people with development and mental health disabilities in the upcoming election.
Well, I think what's at stake is access to health care. I mean, and we know health care is health care now. It's not mental health care and physical health care. It's integrated, and it has to be integrated, and it has to be people. You can't pay out of pocket for the kinds of services we need, and so that is the core thing. And are we going to support our keep our Medicaid, and are we going to continue to make a pathway for people to be insured? it's pretty basic.
I absolutely agree. Access to medical care is, my son could probably survive 24 hours without it. His current seizure medicine out of pocket would be, well, it's $7,000 a month for my son's around for his seizure medications alone and for his port. He has a G-tube. Now, insurance is so overwhelmingly complex, right? So that's what we would have to pay, but that's actually not what they get reimbursed for. You know, some of you, I see you nodding your heads, so it's confusing. So it doesn't cost $7,000, but if I had to pay for it out of pocket, I would have to pay $7,000. So, you know, I mentioned I was a public school teacher, and so I think I can stop my math lesson there, right? I can't do that and keep my son alive. So access to medical care is actually my son not going into status epilepticus in front of me and dying in front of me and my 3-year-old and my husband. That's a cap, that's pre-existing conditions, that's my son living because he has to have access to medical care. And I have health insurance through my district, and he also has the Medicaid waiver, protecting the Medicaid waiver program. It was a lifesaver for us, literally a lifesaver. So he's really cute. I can show you a picture of him.
Do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Not particularly. I was just going to say healthcare. So.
Okay.
No.
The next question, and again, whoever wants to answer, you represent different groups. Different groups are here too. How active, and this is obviously for the politicians that are here, how active are the constituents of these groups in the political process?
Can I answer? Well, I'll let her. This is probably my 3rd or 4th panel I've ever spoken at. And all of that has been since my son was born. There are a few things that will fuel an advocate, like protecting a child. And most people in here are parents or family members or people living with a disability themselves. So we're literally fighting for lives. So I guess that kind of answers the question. You have people fighting for their lives or the lives of their loved ones. We're organized. We have to be because our lives, you know, and there are many beautiful things about my son surviving his strokes, including that I've been able to join this amazing disability community and see what powerful people that have and are going to continue to change the world. And I wouldn't mess with the mama bears. That's all I have to say.
One of the things that has happened at Thriving Connections with families that are pulling themselves out of poverty with help, with support, not by themselves, is that they become advocates in a lot of areas. And part of that program is about giving back. And it's been wonderful to see people who, as they stabilize, you have to be stable somewhat financially before you can be an advocate. If you're working 3 minimum wage jobs and you've got a child with disabilities, these are not unusual stories. You're not out advocating for anything except getting up the next morning and going through it again. And so we have to support people so they can advocate.
First, I'd just like to say that I'm up here representing young people with disabilities, but for me, I'm very politically active. I watch politics. I volunteered on a political campaign. And I think for young people with disabilities, the experiences that I've had is, they say, many of them have told me, I don't like politics, I don't you know, I don't understand about voting. Why does my vote matter? So, and then I'll say to them, you know, of course your vote matters. This is your future that you can shape by voting and by engaging in the political process. But I think one thing that needs to happen is that young people with disabilities need to be taught about the political process, and they need to be taught to engage more in the political process. So, yeah.
We have one last question, and that's it's a one-point question, so it shouldn't take too long to answer it. And that is, what's the one thing you would like our candidates that are here tonight, or any candidate, to take away from this town meeting? Kind of hard to narrow it down, huh?
Oh, my.
I'll go, unless
ahead.
anyone's up. If you're not dealing with potential mortality of a child on a daily basis, you might not understand that what we're fighting for when we're talking about access is literally a child's life, is literally an adult's life. If these services protect people who have beautiful, wonderful, full lives, and it keeps them alive, and it keeps them a part of our community. And that's, I would encourage you, if you aren't living with a disability yourself, if you're not living with a person with a disability, if you have not been a part of this community before, to put yourself into it, because it is one of the most eye-opening, beautiful worlds that I've ever been a part of. And just understanding that some people will not survive without access to medical care and access to different forms of support besides medical care as well.
This is similar. You know, if we don't make sure that people have access to quality health care, mental health care, and the basic needs, we're all going to pay a price. You know, that was said here earlier. We're all going to pay a price. That's crucial.
I think when you talk about healthcare and the need for expansion of Medicare and Medicaid, for me and for also many young people, it can mean the difference between getting to go out in the community and get errands done that you need done, and also daily care tasks like being able to, for instance, just get out of bed in the morning and get a shower and then go get groceries. And everyone should have that freedom to conduct their lives the way they want. But for us, sometimes we need support to do it. And I think everyone should have the freedom to go out in their communities and live their lives as young people the way that they would want, and I would think the way that anyone would want. So the expansion of healthcare and the DSP crisis is a very, very real thing, and it's something that really needs to be taken seriously. So thank you.
Please thank our we're going to excuse you to go to your seats, and we're going to have our candidates come up. But while we're doing that, I want to introduce to you Curtis Cook. He's worked for Stone Belt ARC since 2006. During that time, he's worked as a direct support professional and now as a frontline manager who continues to provide direct supports as well. Prior to coming to Stone Belt, he provided in-home supports to a man with cerebral palsy and also to as a certified nursing assistant. Though his master's degree is in music, being seriously ill earlier in his life caused him to rethink what he wanted to do and the impact that he wanted to make. And I'd ask you now to please welcome Curtis Cook to the podium.
Every Tuesday night, there's an amazing thing that happens at the local bowling alley. Around 100 citizens of Monroe County gather to participate in a bowling league. People mixing and mingling, laughter, cheers, eating, and of course, bowling. Each person living life to the fullest. It's the Special Olympics Bowling League, and it's a sight to behold. And present among it all, almost doubling the size of the event, are men and women who have dedicated their lives to ensuring that events and lives such as these continue to thrive. They are called DSPs, or Direct Support Professionals. But, and sadly, too often that dedication comes with much sacrifice. Lack of funding in this field means lower paying salaries, which also means fewer people wanting to work or remain working. It means a large percentage of our workforce comprised of very part-time college students, often able to give no more than 8 to 12 hours a week, and a smaller percentage of full-time staff who are often overworked, tired, and stressed out. This in turn means less time away from work, time with family, time for sleep, time for their own lives and interests. Sometimes really good, dedicated staff who've worked for years become overwhelmed and quit. We have a saying in this field that disabilities don't take holidays. Stonebelt realizes the importance of employees taking time off and having vacations, but even that is difficult to do, given the lack of employees we are able to keep on board. It's not the company's fault that there's such a high turnover rate. Because of lack of funding, we are not able to pay competitive salaries to our employees, increasing the already demanding workloads on those who do choose to stay. So why do some of us choose to stay? It's for the individuals we work with. I, for one, have worked for Stonebelt for a total of 12 years. Among the individuals I currently support is a gentleman who has been with Stonebelt from its beginnings. He started out living in a 24-hour supported group home, was transitioned to living in an apartment with a couple of other roommates, to eventually living alone with his cat, and requiring no more than 4 to 8 hours of supports a day. He knows the bus routes, knows and is known by people all over town, volunteers at the community kitchen, and has held the same job for nearly 20 years. But I've also worked with individuals who have never developed language, or may have very limited communication capabilities, for whom a huge accomplishment in their lives may mean merely participating in doing their own laundry, or being able to go out into the community without having a major emotional breakdown, throwing themselves on the floor, or causing harm to themselves or others. Situations like these require staff who are able to maintain a calm, cool manner at all times, exhibit profound patience, be able to act quickly, to remember and put into play any number of techniques and practices as prescribed by each individual's behavioral support plan and individualized support plan. And yes, sometimes even put themselves in harm's way to prevent the individual from harming themselves or others. I don't have time to go into the rigors of day-to-day work in the client's homes, in the group homes, in a day program. But in short, DSPs are, to a degree, nurses, counselors, chauffeurs, mediators, home health aides, coaches, mentors, cooks, financial advisors, secretaries, the list goes on. It's a lot. A DSP's job requires a lot. It's no wonder that 50% of the people entering this field don't make it past the first 6 months. All that said, I, for one, love my job. I might not always like it or be happy about it, but I love the fact that I'm doing my part to empower and enable people with intellectual disabilities to live fuller, happier, and more meaningful lives in our community and society as a whole. I look and see the lives of our clients live to their fullest, having purpose, being out in society and at the bowling alley, living lives that may otherwise never have had the opportunity to live because of organizations like Stone Belt and the men and women who dedicate their lives to working in this field. But I'm afraid this work will become more and more difficult to maintain if we cannot continue to hire qualified DSPs and adequately compensate the employees we already have. In 2016, state legislators passed a bill increasing reimbursement rates to improve direct care staff wages. We are truly grateful for this and want to encourage those of you who are running for office, as well as those of you already in office, to continue making funding like this a priority for state spending and working to give this important and necessary work the recognition and compensation it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. And thank you for the excellent reasons you gave for supporting the direct support professional. I think it was very clear in your talk about what it means. So thank you very much for that. At this time, we have our panel up here. We're going to make a couple of announcements, and then they will introduce themselves to you. The announcements are that we're going to allow index cards with questions on them, and they'll be available to you. You may direct the card or the question to a specific candidate or to candidates at large, and we ask you that you pay attention to three things in particular. The question should be related to the candidate's office that they seek. For instance, a state issue, if it's a state issue for those candidates that would deal with that issue. That it not be personal in nature to the candidate, and three, that it be related to a disabilities issue. At this time, I'm going to introduce the people that are here, and I'm going to start and go that direction. And then when we get done with that, we'll start at the other end and come back with each of the candidates introducing themselves, and they will have a time limit on doing that of 3 minutes. And if they get close to the time, I'll remind them that they're getting close, and if they go over, we will stop and go to the next candidate. So let me do my best to get everything in the right order and in the right name, so we have that. Closest to me, Indiana House District 46, Thomasina Marcelli, Democrat. Next is Indiana House District 61, Representative Matt Pierce, over there, not next to me. All right. Next is Indiana House District 60, Representative Peggy Mayfield, Republican. Next is Indiana House District 60, candidate Penny Githens, Democrat. By the way, make sure I do all this right. Thomasina is a Democrat, Matt's a Democrat, Peggy's a Republican. Penny Githens is a candidate for the 60th District. She's a Democrat. And then Indiana House District 62, Representative Jeff Ellington, a Republican. Indiana House 62 candidate Amy Swain, Democrat. And Indiana District 65 candidate Jared Stancomb, a Republican. Now, representatives...
Democrat.
Well, okay. It's not too late to change.
I've made up my mind a while ago.
I apologize for that. I'm sorry. And then we also want to mention that Chris May of District 65 and Representative Bob Heaton of District 46 both sent their regrets that they were unable to attend this evening. So, candidates, for your opening statement, you'll each get 3 time minutes. Be ready to stop when I tell you you've run out of time, and we'll start with Thomasina.
So most of what you can find in my education, you will find in your program. What you won't find is that at 17, I made the decision to support a mother who was disabled and become her caregiver. This was my first degree, and I don't have to share that with anyone who has become a caregiver. You learn every day, every day. And for 7 years, which is how long it took for Social Security to be picked up, I learned every single day. It was a senator from the state of Indiana, Bob Lugar, who pushed for my mother to get Social Security, and without him, she would not have those benefits. So I know, as a representative for you, that I will fight tooth and nail for dignity above all for all Hoosiers. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Well, on Tuesdays we have bowling, but every Monday night there's something amazing that happens in Wilmington also. That's when my son Nathan, who has autism, participates in trivia. He's on a team, and he actually helps his team because his memory is such that he can get all those little bits that I forget every day. He was introduced to trivia by a DSP, someone very much like Curtis Cook, and it's a DSP who takes him there every Monday night. So I feel like next year I want to be on the panel, Leslie, because I could tell some of the same stories about my life and my son's life that you all heard from our panel. My son's now 28. He has autism, he has epilepsy. He receives services through both Life Designs and Stone Belt. When he was diagnosed 22 years ago, the incidence rate of autism was estimated at about 1 in 2,500 individuals. But it's been on the rise, and now it's estimated that school-age kids, the incidence rate is 1 in 59. That's a huge increase. These are numbers from the Centers for Disease Control. This means that there are almost 19,000 students with autism in Indiana, and that puts a lot of pressure on families, on schools, and on our social services. Now this summer, the state legislature's education committee has been tasked with looking at education for people with autism. There's not a single person on that committee who has a background in education. There's not a single person on that committee that has a background in autism. While my license has lapsed, I was formerly a math and chemistry teacher. I have a master's in educational psychology, and for 22 years I've been learning about autism. I want a seat at that table, and I want it badly. Now, some of you are asking why we should care about those 19,000 kids who are in school. Well, guess what? They all grow up. And right now, individuals who are adults in Indiana with autism, only 30% of them are working. And of those 30%, most of them are working part-time and do not have benefits. I think that's an appalling statistic. I want things to change, and education is one of the venues that we have to make that change. So, thank you again. I'm Penny Githens, and I'll be there every single day.
Good evening. My name is Peggy Mayfield, and I am the representative for District 60, which covers portions of Morgan and Monroe counties. I was elected in 2012, and I currently serve as the Assistant Majority Floor Leader. I'm also appointed to Ways and Means, which deals with appropriations, public policy, and insurance. In addition to that, I am appointed to the Indiana Commission on Hispanic and Latino Affairs and the Indiana Commission for Women. Both are year-round commissions that meet bi-monthly, and they both fall under the Indiana Civil Rights Commission. I want to thank the organizers for putting this together. It's going to be very, very helpful to take the information that we have tonight and see how it dovetails into the 1102 task force that was created and is going around the state right now. I think they have 11 meetings, and I think they've had 8 of them so far. The purpose of the 1102 task force is to analyze, essentially reimagine how the state provides services what services are needed, who needs them, how many people. I mean, they're drilling down into trying to gather all the information. This is a continuation of the 317 Commission that was back in 1997 that was dealing with the closing of the institutions and how we were integrating the disabled into the community. And now in 20 years, as someone has mentioned, we've learned so much more, and now we're trying to figure out what direction we are taking with the knowledge that we have now. So I just wanted to, some of you have already reached out to me with your experiences and expressing concerns in a few areas, and I will be sharing those concerns with as we move forward next session, and I look forward to continuing to hear from individuals and the advocates on the topics. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Matt Pierce. It's my honor to represent the people of House District 61, which is most of the city of Bloomington and a little bit of rural area north of town, but it's a fairly compact district right here in the middle of Monroe County. And I've made it my #1 priority in the legislature to try to be a voice for people who don't have the high-paid lobbyists, who don't have the people to be there on the ground all the time. Now, I will say that your state organization and you as individuals have been very effective. You always come up to the legislature and we hear from people, so that's good. But there are many times I look around the room and people are debating and arguing about things, and I ask myself, who's really not in this room? Who doesn't have a voice right now that needs to have a voice? And I try to make it my job to be a voice for people who aren't able to be there. And one of the things that has concerned me greatly is the management of the state budget. The budget is the #1 issue we'll handle in the upcoming session, whoever's elected to be there. And you might not have known it unless you're paying careful attention, but over the last 4 or 5 years, the amount of revenue coming into the state to fund programs has significantly reduced because a number of tax cuts. There was a cut in the corporate income tax. There was elimination of the inheritance tax. There was a reduction in the financial institutions tax. A small cut in the personal income tax. And when you add up all those together and you look at the impact from 2013 when those tax cuts began to take effect through 2024 as the corporate income tax continues to be reduced over time, the amount of revenue the state will not have because of those decisions by the General Assembly is $6,722,800,000. That's the latest estimate from Legislative Services Agency. So why does that matter? Well, the fact of life is the things on this list, transportation, housing, support services, you name it, it takes money to fund those programs. Imagine what we could be doing with more than $6 billion of revenue over the next 10 years to support people. And so I will work to try to see that we have a sound fiscal policy, because when I raised the issue of how are you going to deal with this reduction in revenue, how are you going to replace it, the answer was, oh, supply side economics will solve the problem for you because we'll have so much more economic activity that will actually make up the lost revenue. And ironically, or maybe predictably, the corporate income tax estimate have only reached the estimate one time in this past several years. So it's not really working the way it needs to be. And that's something I hope to work on when I return to the legislature. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Amy Swain, and I'm running for House District 62, which is predominantly portions of Monroe County and Greene County, a little bit of Martin, and a little bit of Davies County. And most of that is in a very rural area, and so the issues that were brought up of transportation, child care, just access in general, are real concerns for our district. My interaction with the disabilities community is a little different than some of the others on this panel. I worked at the Monroe County YMCA for a number of years as Director of Member Services, and we had several of the people, some of them in this room, who would come in on a regular basis to work on their health and wellness there at the Y. So I would see them on a regular basis and got to know them. They got to know me. And as I would see them out in the public, we would interact as well. I would see them at the jobs that they had. And it was a really wonderful experience. I'm very supportive of the disabilities community. The major things that the legislature needs to take a look at is obviously funding, making sure that Medicare and Medicaid are protected. When you have a pre-existing condition like Kate was talking about from day 2 of a person's life, you need that help early. And it can make such a big difference on a person's entire life if they get the aid and the mentoring and the services that they need. And not only for that person, but also for that person's family. Because being a direct caregiver, I've been a caregiver of an aging parent and trying to navigate the insurance forms and processes and trying to navigate the whole healthcare system with the VA and other places. It can take a toll on a family and on a caregiver. So I really applaud the direct service professionals like Curtis and the rest of you and for the families, because you're supporting people who just want to live self-directed lives and live up to their full potential. So as a legislator, I would make sure to look at the funding, make sure we can continue the services, expand the Healthy Indiana plan, look at protecting Medicaid, and all the things that it takes to make you successful as caregivers, as direct service professionals, and as people living in our community. Again, my name's Amy Swain. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting us here. It's always informative to be here. My name's Jeff Ellington, and I represent District 62. I've been in the Indiana House, your voice, since 2015. I got involved in running for political office early in the 90s because there was people in this community and across Indiana that really didn't have a voice, or they did not think they had a voice. They didn't think it mattered. But it's events like this that brings experience to those who make decisions. It brings back emotions for me. I was lucky and fortunate enough to be appointed by, back then, the county council, where I did 8 years, to be on the board of directors for Centerstone, where I went to their monthly meetings, went and visited their resources, their group homes, their services, how they functioned, the problems they had. And that led to me and my wife and our family opening up our farm on the south side of Bloomington, to the PALS program, which we housed for 13 years, to give them a footprint, a foothold to be able to save money, to be able to purchase their own facility, which I thought was great for this community, not only for Bloomington and Monroe County, but surrounding counties. And my personal experience was, everybody, I think every family has had a family member who has been some sort of form of mental disability, physical disability. I know my family did. My brother, he was schizophrenic, and I was his, not caregiver, but I was his payroll person, when he got his disability check in, and I had to make sure that, he spent that properly, he was taking care of himself. He was able to go to work, and that's one avenue that I would like to be able to help with, is those who are on disability, those who get Medicaid or Medicare. There's a threshold with some programs on the limits that you're allowed to make. And I know as an employer, and as friends of other employers who I just had conversations with this morning, there's people who want these jobs. They may not pay a lot, maybe $9, $10, $11 an hour, but some of them are not able to even make more than $700 a month, or their benefits get cut off. That has to stop. We have to have more of a bridge there to help support those individuals who want to be a part of our community. Just going, like you say, going to the store, being able to do that. I mean, being able to wake up to make sure your person you're taking care of is alive, that they've not had any complications. That's just emotions that's going through me just from my past experiences. The increase in caregivers, the hourly rate, the increase in transportation fees that we might be able to disperse out to these communities and nonprofits. I'm your voice if you live in my district, but I'm also your voice if you don't live in my district. Whether you vote for me or not, it doesn't matter. I'm still your voice. And I know it probably took too long, but this is really close to my heart to try to help people. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jared Stancombe and I'm a Democrat running for District 65. My opponent unfortunately is not here to take your questions on disability rights, which is a shame. But just to dispel any myths, I'm not in high school. I'm actually in my 30s, so I get it all the time. So afterward, I'm in my 30s. Just don't even bring it up. So I used to teach 8th grade in Washington, D.C., and about 60% of my students had some sort of what we call emotional behavior disorder. That would include ADHD, PTSD. I dealt with a lot of students with trauma. And they also had incredibly poor access to health care. Many of their parents, unfortunately, were not all that proactive in standing up for them and making sure they had access to care. Their schools were really the first access point for them for quality mental health care. If it wasn't for the schools, some of them would probably be in jail. And actually, some of my students actually did end up in jail, unfortunately. And these are 14-year-old children. So in Indiana, though, I want to make sure that our budgets reflect our values. I want to make sure that we have the leadership at the State House, not just lip service, not just, I'll be your voice. I want you all to join me. I want people from Stone Belt to come to the State House with me. Yeah. I want you guys to be a part of this because I don't have all the answers, but I want your experiences to be heard at the State House because your experiences will make more than an impact than probably some state representative. So I really rely upon stories and to keep me going and inspire me in this campaign. And I really want my values are that access to healthcare matters. I believe access to healthcare is a right and not a privilege, especially for those with disabilities. And I would like to see, I would love to protect Medicaid. I've been on Medicaid. I've had troubles before and it's helped me before, and I want to make sure also that you guys have access to quality education so you guys can thrive. I know that 1 in 5 people with disabilities are in poverty. I know 35% of working age persons with disabilities are working. Most people with disabilities aren't working. We need to build pathways for people with disabilities to thrive in our society. And I just don't see that, and I want to be a part of the effort to bring leadership to the State House to make sure that people with disabilities can thrive in Indiana. Thank you.
I'm going to start us off with a question, and this is for whoever wishes to answer it. Okay. And remember that
go ahead.
Remember there are cards available. If you need a card, hold up your hand. Somebody will give you a card. If you filled out the card, hold up your hand again, they'll pick up the card. And remember, we want the questions to be related to the office a candidate is seeking. Also that there's not personal nature to the questions that are asked. And finally, that they're related to disability issues. And the question I want to start off with is, given the coming tsunami of young adults on the autism spectrum aging out of school, what should the state be doing to prepare for the coming crisis relative to housing, employment, and support services?
Let's go first.
I yield the representatives first if they would like to go ahead and have an accurate plan.
And have an accurate plan?
Yeah.
Well, for me, it goes back to making sure that we have a sustained budget for those individuals, for those services, whether it be transportation vouchers, whether it be I think early intervention to try to help families early when they're young through all our high schools and grade schools, have opportunities for mental health counselors in each school district, paid for, I think, by the state, is what I'd propose, would, I think, begin on the right footprint.
I know people personally with autism who have recently graduated from high school, and they've been looking for a job, any job, really for a long time, and working as a janitor, working in fast food. It's very tough for them to find a job. And I would like to see, I recently spoke to the CEO of Cook about a Pathways program that they've created for employees who haven't completed their college or their high school diploma. And I would like to see pathway programs similar to that for people with autism. So they can maybe be hired on a part-time basis, learn skills, and then become full-time employees that with benefits and have the stability that they need to really succeed in our society.
Not everybody has to answer the questions. Everyone down here, we need to pass down this way.
Are these other mics live?
Oh, they're live for them, but they're not live for the audience here.
Okay, well, I've had to think about this issue for many years now. My son graduated from high school in 2008. We now have Nathan living on his own, which we celebrate almost every day. To help individuals like this, one of the critical skills that we need to be working on while they are in school and from the very, very earliest ages is their social skills. Nobody works in isolation, and so we need to teach them how you interact. And sometimes this is very simple, but sometimes it's very complex, and so we need to be supporting them with those kinds of skills. We need to have people who will support them on the job. These are employment coaches, and they are as underpaid as our DSPs are. I know we go through at least one a year with my son. We need to worry about transportation. Bloomington is adequate at best. I think that we need to expand our buses, and we need to expand other forms of transportation. We're just waiting for the day when, for Nathan, self-driving cars are a reality. Yes. We can't let them touch that. We need other supported housing for individuals like this. And we need to use the model that the college internship program has for moving people from dependence to independence. But that model right now is very, very expensive, and so we need to figure out other funding mechanisms and other ways to implement that model to move people, not just on the autism spectrum, but with other developmental disabilities, into full life within our community. Thank you. Very briefly to add to what Penny said, as Dr. McCarty said earlier, it's not about not having the intelligence. We have the intelligence, we don't have the resources. There are absolutely no transitional, as Penny said, locations. As a state, we have unfortunately spent millions of dollars on review boards for workforce development to see if workforce development is working. My suggestion is to stop and to start putting that into transitional housing, into funding, into every program for workforce development in people who really want to work. People who really want to show up to this. And they may be categorized as disabled, but they have more ability than most that we have in the state at this current time. Thank you.
I'm going to move to a different question, and the audience has asked me to ask you if each time, to help them because they're voters, state your district number and your name, so they get that firmly in their mind about who they're going to be voting for, and also your party, then that will help them immensely on who you are. All right, we have our first questions here, and there is a special time limit now on the candidates. If it's a specific candidate question, they have 2 minutes to answer the question that's been asked. and do it that way. So here goes the first question, provided I can read it. What will you do to increase funding for mental health services for people with disabilities?
This is a two-part answer. The first goes with supporting our education systems. Currently, our master's degrees and higher in psychology are supported. However, more support with that and staying in Indiana and working for our resources in our mental health needs to be key. Our rural areas are suffering the most. As a nationally registered EMT, I can tell you, with a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology, I was the one that sat in the back of an ambulance with schizophrenic patients, with suicidal ideation patients, for 8 hours or more. I also have a certification in Illinois. I was asked to pick up patients in Illinois and take them to Harsha in Terre Haute. This is a huge problem in Indiana. When we do not have the resources to help all of our citizens, no one suffers more than society. When we cannot give our citizens dignity and assistance in one of the largest organs that we have in the body, and that is the brain, we fall as a society. So my plan is to increase healthcare for all with HIT 2.0 without increasing your taxes, but also increasing actual facilities, supporting places like Life Designs, so that we have more facilities and transitional programming. Thank you.
Your name, please?
Thomasina, House District 46, Democrat.
Hi, I'm Penny Githens. I'm a Democrat running in House District 60. We were asked about increasing funding for mental health services for those with disabilities. Right now, a huge number of people who are incarcerated suffer from mental health and or developmental disabilities. Instead of spending money to incarcerate people, we should be using that money to treat them.
Yep.
Period. Flat out. We have to recognize what the issues are for people and stop incarcerating people because they have a developmental disability and or a mental health problem. The other issue, as Matt brought up, is that we keep sending money back to people who maybe don't always need it. Right now, our state determines how much money they have, and then they decide how it will be allocated. We need to decide how much we need, and then figure out a way to get that money.
Yes.
So I personally support increasing funding for both mental health services and for people with disabilities. Thank you.
Peggy Mayfield, Republican for District 60. I think it was mentioned earlier that one of the biggest changes, biggest obstacles that we're facing is not considering mental health separate from healthcare. So if we can start getting that conversation to get people to understand that they are one and the same, that they fall under the same category, which will take a while, that will be one of the biggest things to help address that problem. I touched on that 1102 task force earlier because I think the data in that is what we're going to need. And it'll be very interesting to find out because they're looking at how many individuals receive services in Indiana, the nature of the available services, the waiting list for their services if there is a waiting list, what kind of services are really needed, where they're waiting for their services, the needs assessment, their effectiveness of the services offered by the state. So, I mean, there's a lot of data that we've not looked at in 20 years, and I think that will help us form what is going to be a 10-year plan moving forward.
Hi. I'm Matt Pierce, Democrat from House District 61, and I think probably what we're going to find for most of these questions is it keeps coming back to the budget, it keeps coming back to resources, it keeps coming back to money. You just can't avoid that. And I think I'd like to add to the point that Penny made is that it's interesting how when you basically lay out all the needs of the programs the state funds, and there are quite a few, there are a lot of people with demands, you have to prioritize that. And oftentimes what you hear is like, gee, sorry, we just don't have enough revenue coming in, so we can't get the job done. And the thing that I find interesting is that when it came to road funding, what the legislature did is they went out and they studied how much money they thought they would need to do all these road projects that people wanted. Then they came back and said, we're going to raise the money to do that. And so the gas tax was increased, registrations were increased on cars. Now the thing that I objected to on that is at the same time we're raising taxes for people filling up their tanks or registering their cars, we continue to give the corporations income tax cuts, continuing to step down. That made no sense to me. But the most important point was, for whatever reason, when it came to our roads, the legislature was willing to say, what is the need and how do we raise the revenue to meet that need? And we do not do that in anywhere else. When it comes to social services, we're just told, sorry, we don't have enough money. And by the way, ignore that large surplus sitting over there in the corner. We're going to keep that where it is. So it's just a matter of political will for us to set the right priorities and do what we need.
Amy Swain, candidate for House District 62, Democrat. It does come down to funding. In order to be able to address the issues for providing mental health services, just some of the issues we've talked about before, transportation is a big one, access, affordability. We need to be able to take a look at the budget and figure out where to get the money from. Those of you who advocate for those services, for those with disabilities, your input is critical. Having individuals like Penny and like Kate tell first-person stories of being caregivers and what their families experience and what is needed is impactful. So you need to contact your legislators and let them know. We need to look at regional possibilities because that can keep costs down. There's a move towards that in other areas like economic development. Why not put the same initiatives together for funding services for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities and those with mental health issues as well. So if we can plus some of our pluses and look at where we can keep costs down and increase services, I think that's going to be really critical. So we need to take a look at the budget on a statewide level and find out where we can get those additional fundings for so that we can increase salaries for direct service professionals, increase services that are given to the disabilities community. So keep fighting for it, keep making your voice heard, and elect the people that are going to listen. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Ellington, Republican, District 62. But really, for this kind of issue, it doesn't really matter what party you're from. It really requires somebody that's going to be your voice to be effective. One thing I would like to do, I've been talking about this for about a year, especially to the Ways and Means members. We gave scholarships to teachers a few years ago. 4-year scholarships. It only went to 250 statewide. But once they graduate, they have to spend 4 years in an Indiana school, and that fee is waived. That's free money for that education to help our community. What I proposed is we need to get help early on to these kids while they're young. Maybe a parent doesn't realize what's going on. Maybe a teacher is not trained fully to realize what's going on. But if we would give some scholarships to mental health providers to stay and be assigned to each school district all throughout Indiana at the expense of the state paying for that, we need to start this by doing early intervention and also trying to keep those talented individuals who graduate with masters here in Indiana from going to another community who pays more. You know, you always hear about there's negotiation in the paper. The police officers are negotiating because they're comparing cities to cities and states to states. The firefighters do the same thing. It happens in a lot of professions, but where have I heard that coming for mental health providers? I think that right there needs to start. And that's how we can retain all that experience to help us at an early age and beyond. Thank you.
Jared Stancomb, I'm running for State Representative for District 65. I just want to repeat what I said earlier. You know, our budgets reflect our values. I believe that currently our state budget really doesn't reflect the value that people with disabilities really matter in this state. I want to change that. Like I said, I used to teach. I recently heard about a year ago the concept of the ACEs score, the Adverse Childhood Experience score. And I've been working with children and in recovery groups, so children of people in recovery. And I've actually given them the ACEs test. And these are young kids, and they score alarmingly high. And I think a score of 4 or above makes you 4,000% more at risk at alcoholism than someone with a score of 0. In our schools, at Bedford North Lawrence High School, where I went to school, the ratio of school counselors to students is 400 to 1. They don't have any social workers. They don't have any mental health care providers, and we really don't even have a nurse in there full time. I mean, the state of our health care, mental health care, especially in our schools, is absolutely terrible, and that's because that's really what we value in this state, and that's the people that we elect, that's what they value. And also with law enforcement, I got a survey from the Fraternal Order of Police, and I said, you know, I would love to talk to you about the training you provide to new cadets on working with people with mental health issues because of things I've seen in the media of incidents involving police officers and people with mental illnesses. Also, I would love to see people with disabilities be treated better in our hospitals. My mother works in a hospital, St. Vincent Dunn Hospital in Bedford, and she says that really the healthcare providers there really stigmatize people with disability issues, particularly those with addiction. So, sorry. Thank you guys. Jared Stancomb, District 65.
Not every candidate has to answer every question. This next one's a two-parter, but it's a short answer two-parter. The first part of the question is, will you fight for Medicare for all? The second part of the question is, will you fight to increase funding for DSPs? Will you fight for Medicare for all? Will you fight for increasing funding for DSPs?
I will not curse, but you can enter any word you want. Yes. And yes. And I have a comprehensive plan that does not raise taxes, that puts $2 billion in surplus so we know that we have it, and it gains interest in Indiana, in an Indiana company, so that we never have to pay for it, and it regenerates. Yes. Medicare for all is a federal issue, not a state issue. We need to make that distinction. But I do support expanding Medicaid within the state and making sure that we allow the HIP 2.0 program to serve even more people. Yes, I would fight for increased salaries for DSPs and for employment coaches. And I think the other thing that we're forgetting is that we need to put more money into special education. Other states put, on average, at least $1,000 more per student into special education. We are behind the curve, and our kids suffer.
What's your name?
Oh, I'm Penny Githens. I'm running as a Democrat in House District 60. Thank you, Susan.
Anyone else? Okay, go ahead.
Peggy Mayfield, Republican for District 60. As Penny mentioned, and the Medicare for All is a federal issue, and we've continued to work in the state to address the HIP 2.0. As far as the DSPs, Not only would I, but I have fought for the increase in pay, voted for the bill in 2016 that restored the reimbursements to the DSPs, and we need to continue to work on that. But it wasn't going to happen overnight, so that is one thing. And on education, we have also increased funding for the severely disabled students. We went up 2% in 18 and another 2% in 19. And that's not a lot. And we need to keep working on that, and we acknowledge that. But we are working our way there, and we will continue to work our way there.
Matt Pearson, Democrat, District 61. I do support a universal health care system. I think we can join the other industrialized and most of the nations in the world to make that happen, but that is an issue that really needs to be handled by Congress on the federal level. But we have our hands full here in Indiana because the truth is HIP 2.0, which we all like to brag about and say we support it, that is essentially Medicaid expansion, which was only possible because the Affordable Care Act was passed under the Obama administration. And I'm concerned that right now we have an Attorney General suing the federal government, trying to basically dismantle the Affordable Care Act. And so as a legislature, we need to be standing up and saying we are not going to go back to the days of pre-existing conditions. We are not going back to the days of caps on total amount of care that you can get. We're not going back to the days of having fundraisers for kids to get health care. We're going to work on the system, we're going to make the system better, and we're going to make sure that everyone has access to the health care they need. That's what we need to be doing in the legislature.
Follow that, Matt, but I agree with everything you just said. So yes, protecting Medicaid and serving more people in Indiana, yes. Working on expanding salaries for direct service professionals, absolutely. Thank you.
Give your name.
Amy Swain, Democrat, running for House District 62.
Jeff Ellington, Republican, District 62. So I will protect Medicaid. Medicare is a federal issue. And I did vote in 2016 for DSP increase. And I think that is just the basis of what I discussed before. We need to make sure that we have qualified individuals that stay in our state, our friends, our families. They know our community. They know our service providers. That's what we need to accomplish. Thank you.
Jared Stanko, I'm running for State Representative, District 65. Back in March, I attended a conference called AIDS Watch. It was a advocacy conference in Washington, D.C., where I openly advocated to senators and our elected representatives to protect the Affordable Health Care Act. Got a very lukewarm reception. So I believe that given the opportunity, they will make every effort to dismantle the Affordable Health Care Act, which is what HIP 2.0 is built upon. Right. So we need to get rid of these people that threaten the Affordable Health Care Act, because it's a and I went to Trey Hollingsworth's office though, and he wasn't even there. He wasn't in Indiana. He wasn't in his office. I don't know where he was, but he was somewhere. But I have been an advocate for Medicare for All, and I just get a very lukewarm reception. And when I tell people that, it could help people with disabilities, it could help people in recovery. There are tens of thousands of people in this state that require Medicaid to pay for going to rehab, paying for medication-assisted treatment programs. Paying for a number of services that they need to really get better from a history of opioid abuse and drug abuse in general. As for protecting, expanding, Medicaid, I want to go ahead and just say, I'll say hell yes. Yeah. I'll protect it. I'll fight for it, because I know it matters to you guys, and I want our values to be reflected in our budgets, and part of my values is that you guys matter. I'll fight for that.
go ahead and pass the microphone to Matt because this is a question specifically for Matt Pierce. It says, what can you do to ensure Bloomington doesn't have, move forward with plans to make portions of downtown Bloomington pedestrian only? That would hurt those with disabilities.
Well, that actually is a local issue, right? Are we talking about, the discussions of Kirkwood and things of that nature? That's really an issue for the city council and the mayor. And I can tell you that I felt that a lot of times the legislature has gotten involved in local issues when it shouldn't. And oftentimes Bloomington will make a decision for itself and then we pass a law over my objection that basically cancels it out. And I think that's a very dangerous way for the legislature to go. So I think it's best for the people here who have concerns about that to make sure you talk to your 3 at-large city council members, your 1 district council representative for the district where you live, and then talk to the mayor. And the great thing about Bloomington, which most people that aren't from Bloomington don't really understand, is we love to have meetings and we like to let everyone have their say. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to comment on that.
Our next question goes to the 2 District 60 candidates, and that is, do you support increasing funding for public schools to provide materials for education and teacher pay raises for our students, including kids with disabilities? That should, how would you, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading it right. How would you vote for public school funding over charter schools?
Can you put that together
again? Let me try it again. It is, do you support increasing funding for public schools to provide materials for education and teacher pay raises? For our student funding, what about for kids with disabilities? And would you vote for public school funding for charter schools?
Okay. Peggy Mayfield, Republican for District 60. If I understand, I'm sorry, it's a long question.
It is.
I want to make sure.
Multi-part too.
As far as increasing funding for schools, yes, every year we go through a school funding formula and work on increasing that funding. We do it on a per capita basis so that each school district gets a certain amount per child. And how they determine they are going to spend that money is under the local control of that school board.
Part of the question is specifically for pay raises for teachers.
There's a whole list of school districts that have given significant pay raises. So again, when the money goes to the district decides how to spend it.
All right, and for giving money to public schools versus charter schools.
Okay, public schools, traditional public schools actually get more funding than charter schools do because charter schools do not have access to property tax dollars. Other than that, on the tuition support, they are identical. Charter schools are considered public schools, so they get the same student funding, but traditional public schools get additional property tax funding.
And then the other part of it was for all students, including students with disabilities.
As I mentioned, we actually have additional funding for students with disabilities in the $9,000 per student range. I'll go this way.
Wow, this is a lot.
Yeah.
Yes, I support increasing funding for teachers. In Mooresville High School, this last year, they finally got a very, very small increase for teacher salaries. In the 5 years preceding that, there was not a cent added to anybody's payroll. And in fact, their incomes went down because their cost of health insurance went up. With the money following the child, we have public schools competing with public schools, and I just strongly, strongly oppose that. I also am not a supporter of charter schools, especially charter schools that are chartered by religious institutions. That means our taxpayer dollars are going to places where we have no oversight and we do not know how that money is being spent. I am also a very, very strong opponent of vouchers, something that my opponent supports. And by the way, I'm Penny Githens, I'm the Democrat running in District 60. And I support increased funding for special education, as I've already said. One of the issues that goes along with this is the caseloads that we expect our providers to carry within the schools. For example, a speech pathologist. In Illinois, there are maximums on a caseload that a speech pathologist can have. I think it's around 30 students. In Indiana, there is absolutely no caseload maximum. You could have 200 students, special education students, on your caseload, and nothing would prevent that. The same is true for counselors in our schools. If we want to reduce what goes on with bullying, if we want to reduce what goes on with regard to mental health in our high schools and middle schools, we need more counselors in there working with those kids every day. And the only way we get those is to increase funding for schools. Thank you.
Again, not everybody has to answer this question, but it's open for anyone. And that is, do you know the unemployment rate for people with disabilities, and do you have a plan to address that?
We've discussed it several times. It's 35%, right? It's 35? It's 33. It's in the packet.
Yeah, it's right there. It's on page like 5.
It's on in the sheet.
Yeah. It's 33%.
35 or something like that. Yeah.
And do you have a plan to address it?
Yes, absolutely. I think that once again, our workforce development dollars who are going to the board that's studying the workforce development needs to actually go into developing the workforce. I know it's a novel concept. And what I would say is every individual can do something. When you value your people as human beings in full dignity, you arrive at a solution. Everyone should be created equal. When that occurs, you come up with ideas to assist them in whatever way. And it may not be the most glamorous of jobs in the entire world, but to that individual who every Monday and every Wednesday and every Friday gets to go and visit their friends and do something different and independent, it is the world. And when we don't invest in every single individual in our state, we are depriving our state of beautiful individuals. Thank you. Thomas again, I'm Penny Githens, a Democrat running in House District 60. I would defer to Kim Dotson on this, and I've known Kim for almost 2 decades. Kim is the leader of the ARC of Indiana. But one of the things that we don't do currently in our schools is we don't do the kinds of things where we ask people what they are interested in. There's a very simple program that actually shows people videos of workplaces and the kind of work that can be done, and they can indicate whether that's something they might be interested in trying. You don't have to be verbal even to indicate a yes or no on something like a video. So we're not doing enough with career development and with individual choice and helping people understand what is available to move people out into the employment world. And I have to tell you, because of my son, this is real personal, but when you meet somebody new, you ask them, what do you do? We define ourselves by our work. Work gives us dignity. So this is a very strong, very high priority for me. Thank you.
It's very interesting. I'm sorry, Peggy Mayfield, Republican for District 60. One of the things that I have found interesting is that even within the disabilities community, there is some disagreement as to what the proper working environment is. So, some people prefer the sheltered workshops, and some people want the integrated employment. So we have some programs that we have passed where we had enhanced employment opportunities for those with disabilities. And we also have a commission on disabilities or rehabilitation with disabilities where we tried to expand that by 4 members of the board to more broadly represent the communities across the state of Indiana and get better feedback on different areas. So those are just 2 of the things we've done in the last couple of years. As far as a long-term plan, I think that, like everyone has said, there is dignity in work. It gives a sense of empowerment. It gives a sense of freedom. It gives a sense of accomplishment. And there's many different paths that can take. So it's very difficult to say, I have a plan, because every disability is going to be treated a little differently, and each person's abilities will be approached differently.
I think one thing that the state could do is help assist more in outreach to employers, because a lot of it, as you know, is just education of employers, let them know what capabilities are. And I think particularly in an economy right now where we continue to hear from employers that, you know, I just can't find the workers I need that will actually show up on time and put in a good day's work. I think we know that the experience of developmentally disabled people working is they're hard workers, they stay on task, and they do a great job. And I just think that a lot of employers don't have that understanding to give people a fair shot at that job. So I think that's something the state should maybe redouble its efforts on, is just trying to educate and recruit employers to bring developmentally disabled people into their workforce.
Amy Swain, Democrat, running for House District 62. When I was Director of Member Services at the Monroe County YMCA, I actually went out to Stone Belt and Light Designs and some other agencies that we worked with who worked with those with intellectual and developmental disabilities to get a better understanding of the challenges that they were facing, their funding, and other things, just to educate myself so I could be the best liaison between those agencies and the YMCA in terms of what we provided as far as services, in terms of what we provided as far as memberships. And I think having that better understanding is really key for employers, because we did have those with cognitive challenges working with us at the Y. And so learning how to structure job descriptions for workers who may need some accommodation. Working with the schools. Most of our schools are, high schools are geared towards college readiness, and not everyone who graduates high school is necessarily going to go to college. And so vocational education is really important, needs to make a comeback. We also need to look at preparing students so that they could graduate with a certification as a CNA or an LPN, or even a journeyman's license, or some other type of skill set or certification, and that could be developed for the disabilities community as well. So when they get out, they can have good paying jobs, so that would take care of affordable housing, that would help offset transportation. And then they could also have others come along with them because they've set the example, and the time is up. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Ellington, District 62, Republican. So how many in this room have heard of Bosma Enterprises? Okay. Brian Bosma, Speaker of the House, Republican. It really doesn't matter, never has, to him and his family. They've been in that service for over 100 years. So we've taken tours up there, state representatives. I've also taken tours of Stone Belt and all facilities in my districts, Martin, Greene, Davies, and Southwest Monroe. And every time I visit a factory or a business that's going to bring more employment bases to our community, I always ask them, do they have programs like Goodwill has in Indianapolis, where they bring in tasks that maybe not as hard to do like at Crane Naval Weapons Base, where you have to have scientists and engineers, but tasks that are something average people could do with disabilities and earn a living to sustain yourself, or at least, you know, make their life better. So wherever I go, I always try to look into a factory or to a business to see if they have that opportunity, and try to get those words out to those who have clients that need part-time or full-time employment. So we have to advocate for you. And I can tell you from experience now, as you listen to me, I am not an English professor. So as a kid, I had a small, slight little problem, but nothing compared to anybody else. I had a speech impediment. So I could say my best friend's name, pronounce it wrong. I could get up in front of a class and read a paragraph or a sentence, and they would laugh at me. But these were my friends. I did not get any help until the 6th grade when a speech therapist came to correct me. So my wife is always correcting me, so thank you, honey. But it's an ongoing process, and you can do better. You can make yourself better. And we, as an elected official, need to help make those avenues more open for you. And I love the visits, I love the visits when you come to the State House on Valentine's Day. Really amazing work, the photographs, the paintings, the postcards. I really love that. Thank you.
Jared Stanko, running for State Representative, District 65. I have a question for our elected representatives, though, if that's okay. No?
Because we don't have time for that.
Okay. I just want to know how many people with disabilities are employed at the State House.
If anyone knows out loud, it's just not a long answer.
Okay. Well, several?
There are some.
Okay, great. I was just curious, because I would like to see people more visible that have disabilities, you know, in areas where they can have influence in our communities. In Bedford, I mean, people with disabilities are generally seen. I talk to our elected leaders about people with disabilities, and to be honest, they don't see it as a priority, because I ask them if they know someone with disabilities, and they really don't say anything. I just don't see it as a priority among some of our leaders, at least in Lawrence County. I asked because I just wanted to know how many people at the State House, you know, these people see that are elected, see day to day that have disabilities. So I was just curious. But in terms of unemployment, though, I just want to echo what I said before on creating a pathway program. I did speak to the CEO of Cook last Friday about their pathway program there. And they provide, like I said, an opportunity for people who didn't complete their high school diploma to earn their GED, which they will then go towards full-time employment. I would like to see people with disabilities go through some sort of pathway program, not necessarily towards academic achievement, but go through a program where they can get employed, you know, maybe get skills and become more integrated into the workforce. So they could, you know, be employed full-time. So, yeah.
Okay, well, keep the microphone down there.
Sure.
What we're going to do now is we're going to go into the closing. We went this way to start. We're going to go this way to go back. I'm sorry?
They have 1 minute.
Yeah, you'll have 1 minute for your closing statement. And when you are ready, I have a couple of things we need to announce first of all. And that is that we want to thank these candidates for taking their time for this important community discussion. Now, I know from previous of these kinds of sessions, they're more than willing to stay around a little bit afterwards. There's some refreshments, and it's a good time. If your question to get asked, ask them personally. Go up to them, talk to them, introduce yourself, and let them know who you are and what your interests are. So at this time, we're going to now ask for closing comments. You have 1 minute. Your timer is right there in front. Is it green or yellow? You're okay. When it's red, we're done. Okay?
All right, I'll make it quick. Jared Stanko, running for State Representative, District 65. I just want to reiterate what I said. You know, our budgets need to reflect our values. I believe that access to health care is a right, not a privilege. I believe that you all should have access to world-class education. I believe that you guys, people with disabilities, deserve the right to receive quality services in their homes from the direct services professionals that are actually paid a fair wage and not leave you after 3 months, like some of the DSPs that I know personally that have gone from firm to firm. I want to do more than be your voice. I want to take you to the State House. I want your voice to be heard at the State House. Well, I can do my part to work on the legislative part. I want you guys to meet people that have influence at the State House. I want you all to join me to fight for you guys. Because this is a priority for me. I'm here tonight because I believe in what Stone Belt does, and I want to make sure that Stone Belt's voice is heard. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Jeff Ellington, currently your State Representative, District 62. It's been an honor serving you. It's been a pleasure. As I go out to the community, I go head to toe, from the time an event opens till the time it closes. I go into Stone Belt centers and visit with their service providers and their clients. I go to Indianapolis and visit new facilities that we may potentially bring to Bloomington as a workforce area for people with disabilities. That is one thing that we need to do, because right now an employer is really having a tough time finding somebody who is dependable. And when I'm not talking about the handicapped, I'm talking about normal people who have opiate problems, who don't have a driver's license, who don't show up to work. And I can tell you the facilities I've been to and visited and toured and listened to the supervisors and business owners, people with disabilities, they show up. They may have an appointment they got to go to, but it's scheduled. They're there, they work, they are happy to be there. They are happy just to someone say hello to them, to greet them, to treat them equally. That's what I want to make sure that your voice is heard, and I will continue to do that as your state representative. Thank you for your thoughts and prayers.
I'm Amy Swain. I'm running for District 62. I have close friends who have sons. One has mental health issues. He started out in a group, he started out living at home, then transitioned into a group home, and now he's living on his own and doing very well. I have another close friend whose son was cared for by the family initially, and then he transitioned into supported living with a roommate in a habitat house. And so the issues of the disability community are dear to my heart because of my close friends and their experience. It's also because of the wonderful people that I've met through the YMCA, both direct support professionals who do need pay increases so that the turnover can be cut down, and also the clients as well. I'd like to see them get good education. I'd like to see them get good paying jobs, and I will be a voice for them at the State House. Thank you.
I'm Matt Pierce, Democrat in House District 61, and I just want to say that you are really good advocates. I mean, one, I'm always certain there'll be a full room of people when this forum is held every couple of years around election time. And despite the fact that you obviously have tremendous demands on you just to care for your families, you squeeze out time still to come to events like this, to write us, to come talk to us. And I know that I can always count on Leslie to come up to the State House with some clients to remind us of their needs. And in fact, the small progress we made on the direct support professional workforce pay is really because you were there. Really, the squeaky wheel gets the grease at the State House, so it's important for you all to continue doing that. And I want to urge you to make sure that you get your friends, neighbors, and family members involved in this elective process coming up, the election coming up. We have too many people who've checked out of the process. They've given up. They think we're all the same. It doesn't matter. And we really need to help them get registered, to get educated about the issues, to understand what the candidates stand for, and then get them to the polls to vote. That's really critical.
Peggy Mayfield, Republican for District 60. You know, I come from a background, or my exposure to working with the disabilities community was practically nil when I entered the legislature. And it has been through the advocacy efforts of folks in this room. I'll say especially Stone Belt, Life Designs. These are people that I've tried to maintain relationships to keep up on the current issues. You know, every 6 months or so, we'll sit down and talk about what's on the horizon, what are the issues. And I've had an opportunity to tour their facilities. Some of the things I can take away are, you know, we need to reduce the bureaucracy, because it's very difficult just getting through the process, let alone the challenges you're facing with under your roof. And we need to maintain as many choices as possible, because there is no one way to deal with the disability. And we need to at least maintain and work on increasing funding resources, identify where the best target of those funding resources will be, what will make the biggest impact, where will we get the greatest return. And those are all things, it doesn't happen overnight. And when you consider that, I've got to cut it off, maybe I'll talk to some of you later, but those are some of the takeaways that I have had working with the disabilities community.
I'm Penny Githens, Democratic candidate in District 60. I live this life. There's nothing much else to say, but I have been asked if I can reach across the aisle and work with people, with others. After Nathan was identified with autism, we learned that our health insurance didn't cover his autism. So shortly after that, I was at the State House lobbying for a mandate for health insurance. It didn't pass the first time, but with Kim's help, and with help from people around the state, I led the fight to mandate health insurance for autism. We were successful that second time. We were one of the first states in the country to have health insurance mandated for autism. We were the very first state that offered coverage for employees of the state. We've been a leader in that field. I will take that same fight, that same passion with me when I'm elected. I will be there for everybody. Thank you. Everybody who knows my son who came out tonight too.
Thomasina Marsili, House District 46, Democrat. If Indiana is a state that works, whom is it working for? How many times have we sat at one of these and said, please help us? This is about the dignity of our state. This is about the dignity of our citizens. This is about electing people who, like myself, would walk into a house on fire and help whomever out. There are two people, two different types of people who walk into a burning building. As a 911 EMT, I can tell you that. There are those who run in to rescue and those who put the fire out. I'm asking you to send me to the State House so I can dampen this fire and assist you. I wear this orange for you tonight. I acknowledge your struggles, and I wish you well in the years to come. Thank you so much.
We have one more thing to do, and that is to thank this panel for being here and representing for you. And we have one more speaker to hear from tonight. Most of you probably already know Kim Dodson. He's the Executive Director of ARC of Indiana. He's going to be talking about staying engaged in the political process and why it matters. Kim is currently serving as Executive Director for ARC of Indiana, a statewide organization that advocates for the issue of programs and services important to the people with any kind of intellectual or other developmental disability and their families. She was recently awarded a Sagamore of the Wabash Award by Governor Eric Holcomb for her 20 years of dedicated service and advocacy. And at this point, we'd like to call on Kim Dodson to give you her thoughts.
There's nothing like being the last speaker when you're already 15 minutes over time. So I will be very quick. I always love coming down to Bloomington for this event. You guys never disappoint. You always fill the room, and it's always very engaging. So thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do each and every day. How many in the room are already registered to vote in November? Fantastic. And again, I knew every single hand was going to go up, and that's fantastic. what you came here tonight, and you need to remember why you came here tonight. You came here tonight to be educated. You came here tonight to learn about where people stood on the issues that are important to you. You've already gotten registered. You've now gotten informed. Now you need to make sure that you get in the voting booth, that you vote, but it's after that is when your work really begins. Because after you have elected your elected officials, you have to continue to educate them. You are the experts. You are the ones who live this life each and every day. You know what the issues are. You know what's working and what's not working. You have to continue to make sure that your voice is heard. And so please do that. Representative Pierce said earlier, we don't have a high-paid lobbyist at the State House. I'm your lobbyist. I'm not high-paid. But we don't endorse candidates. We don't give money to PACs to get elected officials elected. But I will take you over money every single day. We have 30,000 individual members. Those individual members have very big families. When you guys get angry, you get really angry, and you talk. But you also need to make sure that when you get happy, when something goes right, that you share that as well. You need to tell your family and friends what is working and what's not working. Ask them to vote for people who support your family, to support the issues that you care about. It's extremely important. It was asked earlier what our unemployment rate. It's 80%. 80%. We need to make sure that we have ways to get people employed. It was asked earlier how many people work at the State House. Several. It's not a lot. It's not a lot. It's certainly not enough. But we are lucky that we do have several people working at the State House that people do see each and every day. I think Leslie wanted me to talk a little bit about issues. What I will tell you is today the 1102 Task Force met for the 9th time. We have 2 more meetings. There was not a single issue that the advocates talked about or that these candidates for offices talked about that this task force did not talk about today, and probably we approved a recommendation, and that even includes the driverless vehicles. So we are very broad in our discussions. We are talking about every aspect of somebody's life and how it can be impacted and improved. We still need to hear from you, though. We still have a meeting in September. We are taking public comments. We don't have all of the answers, and some of the recommendations are bringing together bigger stakeholders, bigger discussion groups, because we have got to hear from more families and more self-advocates about what's working and what's not working and how things can be improved. 2 very big issues that affect everybody in this room. We do not have enough programs and services and providers for those with coexisting conditions. For those individuals who have both a mental illness and an intellectual developmental disability, they are being left behind. We must continue to be committed to finding ways to solve that problem. The opioid crisis. It is hitting us hard. I am so glad to hear so many people talking about First Steps. First Steps is our early intervention program, birth to the age of 3. That is where we need to be investing our resources. For every dollar we spend there, we are saving at least $17 for every dollar that we put into that program. If we don't invest there, we're going to be paying more through special education and through Medicaid. It makes no sense. We must invest in First Step services. Again, so many other issues are being talked about. We've got to figure out problems. We can't figure out our problems without more revenue. We just can't. So many of our programs cost money. We must find a way to bring new revenue into the system. The ARC of Indiana just made the decision to join the alliance to help increase the cigarette tax. Taxes aren't popular. But so many of our health-related issues can be tied to smoking in Indiana. First Steps, we have a lot of mothers who smoke during pregnancy. That leads to developmental delays and developmental disabilities. We need to make sure that all new revenue from cigarette taxes is invested back into healthcare issues, and that includes First Steps and so many of the other programs that we talked about tonight. So when you leave here today, please continue to get educated. There's a lot of information out there on those tables. One of them will strike you and then you can get involved. Continue to talk to these people over the next few months as they're running for offices. And again, after election, stay engaged. It's extremely important, and we appreciate you being here tonight.
Kim Dotson. One last reminder, there are voter registration forms out there. Most of you had your hands up, you're registered voters. You probably know someone who isn't. Take one and get it to them and make sure they become a registered voter. There are campaign materials out on those tables. For these candidates, please take some of their campaign materials, and where you can and where your heart moves you, work for these candidates to get them elected so that they will be able to carry these messages like you just heard from Kim. And this is the way it's all going to make it better. I want to thank you all for taking your time to be here on what I consider to be, Leslie, a very highly successful program, as you always put on with Stone Belt. The committee did it, and they did it well. Let's hear it for the committee. Good night.